Hello, today I'm here with poet Arthur Sze, and he's going to read his poem, Swimming Laps.
Swimming laps. Swimming backstroke toward the far end of a pool in sunlight. Yellow flares in the nearby aspens. In the pre-dawn sky, Mars and Venus glimmered. How is it a glimmering moment coalesces and the rest slides like flour through a sieve? How is it these glimmerings become constellations in a pre-dawn sky? Reaching the wall, I turn and push off swimming freestyle. How is it we bobbed in water beyond the breaking surf, and I taste that salt in my mouth now? How is it disheveled, breathless, we drew each other up into flame? How is it that flame burns steadily within? Reaching the wall, I turn and push off swimming side stroke. With each scissors kick, I know time's shears. This is not pre-dawn to a battle where the air dips to a windless calm. Let each day be lived, risking, feeling, loving, alive to ivy reddening along a fence. Reaching the wall, I turn and push off swimming breaststroke. How is it I see below than above a horizon line? How is it I didn't sputter, slosh, end up staring at a Geiger counter clock mounted on a barroom wall? I who have no answers find glimmering shards. Reaching the wall, I pause, climb out of the pool, start a new day.
That's beautiful, Arthur. Beautifully read. Thank you so much. Tell us why you chose that particular poem for this anthology, Sign and Breath.
I chose it because you were thinking about song and lyric, and I felt that this was a particularly lyrical poem in one-line stanzas with silences. There's repetition, but there's variation to the repetition. So that kind of structure follows a very song-like quality to my mind.
Yes, and in fact, the silences, one of the things that I think many of us find in writing poems on a page and then hearing them presented is it's difficult oftentimes to render the lines themselves. In this poem, you render them beautifully with the silences in between, and when people see it on the page, they'll know too that they're spaced. The leading is greater than a single space. Is that something that you're doing? How is silence working in your poems, Arthur?
Well, I think I've always been interested in silence, and I think in the last 6 or 7 years, I've started using this form of one-line stanzas because I felt like each line has its own integrity, but also, as you said, to allow more white space between the lines gives a reader a clue that a reader shouldn't just sort of read from one line to the next, that there's a visual cue that there are silences, there are these spaces, breathing spaces in between the language. And they're not just sort of empty spaces, they're really sort of charged silences where they help clarify or create tension with the language that's there. And I'll just add as a sort of side note, I was just thinking about musicality before we started this interview. And I remember Isaac Stern once saying in a famous interview, he was asked, how do you know if a violin concert is going really well? And the interviewer expected him to say, oh, by this incredible riff of gorgeous notes. And instead, Isaac Stern said, I know the music's going really well by the quality of silences.
Mm. Oh, beautiful. One of the lines that I think silence, in a sense, makes even more stark, because the poem in most of this is so lyrical and beautiful, and then we have that barroom Geiger counter,
Right, right,
just kind of reality check
right.
poem, and I was curious about that, because it feels as if we're, we're swimming, and we're in this very sublime space, and then
I'm glad you asked about that, because in a poem like this, where there can be gorgeous images, I also want to not let a reader be lulled into some kind of assumption or tranquility that everything is sort of beautiful and gorgeous. And so occasionally I think it's really important to disrupt that and sort of destabilize it. And that Geiger counter and that image of a speaker who might, end up spending his days just staring in a bar, at this Geiger counter, to me was like, oh, that's a good way to disrupt this sort of gorgeous flow.
Yes, it was, and it's, as I was rereading the poem too, I was thinking about the musicality of using the different strokes and that disruption that happens there, because of course, if you think about it, at least in my limited swimming ability, the side stroke is tough, Arthur.
Right.
It's a place where
Yeah.
you might wind up, and so each one of the movements of the body is both praised, celebrated, and yet we're also aware of its
Right.
precarious nature.
So in using the 4 different strokes, the backstroke, the freestyle or crawl, and the side stroke and the breaststroke, I was also consciously thinking of sort of rhythm in language and musicality. So with the backstroke, there's the sense of being able to look up at the sky, to see the aspens, to see, Mars and Venus, to be opening up, looking up at the sky. And then when it switches to freestyle, I felt rhythmically that line, how is it we bobbed in water beyond the breaking surf, and I taste that salt in my mouth now. I was conscious of trying to pack a lot of language with alliteration into that line to show rhythmically. And in terms of voice, there was a shift that corresponded to the shift in physical movement with swimming.
Yes, very much so. And, I'm thinking about that too, is thinking about the different sources and traditions that, in a sense, are evoked in this poem and in so much of your work. Maybe tell us a little bit about your relationship to the poets that you were bred on and brought up with.
My poetry's been called so many different sort of outrageous labels or whatever. And one of them is, I remember Marilyn Chin saying, your work is neoclassic. And there are a lot of classical references. So I was looking at this poem and thinking of Time's Shears is actually a reference to Dante in the Paradiso, where he is told that if he doesn't keep creating and trying to create something that endures, time will go around his fabric, around his work, and shear it off, basically. So there are these sort of subtle allusions to the classical tradition, but I don't necessarily expect a reader to get that or even want a reader to get that. I guess I would just hope that a reader recognizes or senses that the language looks very simple, but there's also a lot of depth there. So I am drawing on, a classical tradition, or as I said, just like, how is it? And then something different. How is it? The idea of refrain and repetition and variation. Those are all classic song-like strategies that there's a long tradition of.
Yes. Having this privilege of this intimate conversation on Zoom, where it's just the two of us, and yet, of course, it's for the world. I think also of the fact that clearly in your reading, this poem has lived in your body for a long time. I mean, that this is not just something that you just found or even wrote,
Right.
as much as
Right.
composed it. Tell me a little bit about the orality of your work, which is so pronounced and refined.
Well, I think when I'm writing, I will be speaking words out loud to myself to hear the texture. It's very physical. I need to hear the texture of the language as I'm creating, as I'm working with it. It's not something where I can just like say, oh, I'm writing an image. I mean, the sound is really primordial and right there from the beginning. So as I'm writing, I need to hear those sounds and the configuration of sounds. So it's an essential part of the fabric or the weave of the poem.
Thank you so much, Arthur Sze, for joining us in Sign and Breath and your beautiful poem, Swimming Laps.